We are speaking about the Renewables Crossroads. I'm Elise Labott, and I have a wonderful panel to discuss this kind of interesting period that we're in right now, where we're all talking about moving more towards the use of renewable energy. We're certainly not where we want to be, but we're certainly can't go back. In 2020, renewable energy use grew by 3%, predominantly propelled by a 7% increase in electricity utilization, according to the IAEA. And so the world is really crossing into a mass adoption moment for green technologies. We all know about this enormous economic, social, and climate benefits. But in the middle of an economic downturn and supply chain crunch, we're facing a lot of headwinds. So what does that mean for renewables as the world considers accelerating the green energy transition during the global energy crunch? Will these crossroads lead to further adaptation, or will it compel a return to the previous energy landscape? What areas of renewable energy show promise for meeting our increasing demand for energy in the near future? We have a wonderful panel to discuss that. We have Paddy Padmanathan, Vice Chairman and CEO of ACWA.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Jaime Guillen, Energy Director of Mexico Infrastructure Partners. Sherif Foda, Chairman and CEO of National Energy Service Reunited Corporation. And CynthiaZhu, CEO of SinoSynergy International. Thank you so much all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Paddy, let's start with you. How much is the cost of renewable energy generation affecting the pace of mass adaptation?
My view is I think we kind of crossed the kind of threshold, if you like, or the point of inflection. People can argue was sometime in the sort of 2017, as far back as 2017, 2018, when all of a sudden, for a reasonable amount of energy that we consume, when the resources are available, so we don't get stuck with this, oh my God, what happens when the sun is not shining? There is no batteries yet. But for that amount of energy, and regardless of where you are, anything from 20% to, in this part of the world with air conditioning load, as much as 55, 60% of the energy we consume only during the day when the sun is shining. For that energy, around about 2017, 2018, you can argue about it, even in the lowest cost oil producing country in the world, Saudi Arabia, gas producer in this part of the world, there was no way that fossil fuel based energy generation was going to beat solar energy and wind energy. Okay, that happened then. And it has remained so. So we've carried on reducing the price. And that crossing point is what started to really accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. If it was so cost compelling, why would as energy demand kept increasing, so it wasn't even a case of retiring other assets, why would anybody then build fossil fuel based assets? And we saw it. We saw the massive shift immediately. It's gone on. So we got to a point before the current sort of crisis and dramas, we went on, we brought it all the way down in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, even on a renewable energy contract, 1.04 cents per kilowatt hour. Just to give a scale of context, average cost of energy across the world, it's tough to kind of calculate that, but I think people will recognize a number like 12, 13, 14 cents. Huh? When the sun is shining in this part of the world, we were able to start delivering energy at just over 1 cent. Fantastic. Okay, of course, it's now suddenly changed. Rampant inflation, interest rates rising, because it's all capital intensive. But yeah, so what? The 1.04 is now going to become what? 1.8? Shocking. It's a huge increase. But the 1.8 compared to 12. And by the way, 75%, the other point people need to recognize, 75% of the cost of fossil fuel-based energy is the cost of fuel. So during this period, cost of fuel has shot up as well. So that 12 cents is no longer 12 cents anyway. The good Lord doesn't charge us for that energy. So this 1.7, 1.8 remains 1.7, 1.8. So
obviously, the heavens agree with you.
Clearly.
Jaime, how fast is the world switching to renewables? I mean, we're talking about the 5% tipping off point drawing energy from wind and solar. When do you think the world will successfully cross that threshold?
When you ask about crossing that threshold, the 5%,
Yes.
yeah. So, I mean, I think, we're having much,
Keep going.
sorry, it's a little bit distracting, but
It's a little distracting, but we're just gonna
We're gonna
scream
power
until-
through.
Okay. I
So-
think
Power through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yep.
no, I think, with the advances in terms of the efficiency, the cost of production, that's simply driving, an ability to actually deploy more sort of solar, wind, et cetera. So, with that, you're now in a competitive area where now it's a question of actually deploying that. Deploying that in places where you've got good radiation, deploying it in places where you have good wind resource, and also where you've got governments that are actually open and favorable to actually, promoting that. And it's not only governments, but it's local communities, because you require land in some cases. You are putting structures where people may not want structures. So to me, the limitation is not the efficiency, it's not the capital, it's not the need, it's really the political will to actually adopt it at a faster rate. So to me, that to me is the driving issue. And we see it in a place like Mexico. Mexico has one of the best resources, both wind and solar, yet our development has been limited by the government wanting to limit the growth of renewables vis-a-vis thermal or fossil fuels.
Yeah, I want to get to the government issue in a minute because I really think, that's going to be the biggest barrier to green energy, right? Not money or even technology. It's going to be government policy. Cynthia, we've had this disruption in the supply chain. Talk about how renewables can improve the economic and energy stability and economic resilience through supply diversification, because resource-starved countries are considering the use of renewables to lessen their dependence on imports.
Right. So I think on this point, I would like to kind of break down into two perspectives. I think, first of all, there's no doubt that in the current environment, renewable energy definitely brings stability economically and politically. So that's what we're seeing in Europe and in Middle East as well. I think it's just provide an option for the economy and for the society to use. And secondly, the second perspective, I would like to bring in hydrogen, because we're in the hydrogen field. And that's what we see is developing so fast. It's kind of enabling renewable energy development as well. So that's what we call renewable hydrogen. So what does that mean? That just means that hydrogen is produced from renewable energy sources, such as solar, wind. We have seen that developing so fast for the past 6 to 1 year. And I think that trend will also bring in stability to the economy and to the stakeholders, because the cost of the renewable energy is coming down. The cost of providing energy or power generation is coming down as well.
Yeah, Sherif, so, all experts, and we're talking here a lot at FII about how we're in this economic downturn, headed towards a recession, many predicting. How do you think we make that balance about higher upfront costs for long-term saving, which governments are now subsidizing?
Okay, so maybe let me just make a disclaimer first. So obviously I'm from the bad guys, right? So I'm working in oil and gas. So, and I think someone would ask, why are you here, right? So I think why I'm here, because I think we all need all energy sources to be able to cater for the demand that is coming. And I think with all the panels that you heard for the last couple of days, it's very obvious the issue is about lowering emission, and it's not about the source of energy, right? So, and one part that is extremely important is that the renewable energy actually has a huge source for it's extracting oil and gas. So actually, when we lower our emission and to extract, to get a lot of the gas to the world, we actually need a lot of renewable to fuel some of that field. And part of it that is important, as you mentioned, we don't have a problem with permitting of land. So actually a lot of projects we can do, massive project. We have a lot of lands that we can put a lot of solar panel that we can reduce enormous amount of emission, that almost 50-60% of the fuel that we need, just by eliminating the diesel generator that we use in the majority of the refinery and all the stuff we do. So there is a lot of cost and a lot of synergy that we need to do over the next 20 to 30 years, because all these sources will be needed for the future.
But I mean, Jaime, so governments are balancing, having to put these upfront costs, which are expensive for the long-term savings, in the middle of a economic downturn. And as we said, the biggest barrier is not going to be, to money or technology. It's going to be government policies, developing that policy framework. Technology, jobs are going to be needed, education. How do we create a sustainable future with future growth, with further growth, and how much are governments going to be willing to commit to that?
Well, there's two pieces. I mean, just going back to the capital issue, I mean, we manage an infrastructure fund. We're the largest investor in infrastructure and energy in Mexico. We have a large portfolio in renewables and thermal. But I mean, when we talk to all our investors, the number one item they want to invest in is renewables. So the capital is there. It's just, they want to make sure that there's a project where the government is supportive of it. But to me, what the government needs to focus on is, one, facilitating or having the policies to allow that private capital to develop the private renewables, which is there. The experience is there as well, and the technology, as we mentioned. But the other is actually they should be investing in the transition, right? Because when you're investing in renewables, you may be crowding out other sectors, and you may be needing to educate. You may be needing to support new industries or new businesses that will develop around the new industry. And that's where I think the government should be focusing their efforts. Let the private sector invest in the actual investments, because there's enough capital to do that. There's enough know-how, and in fact, probably better know-how than government in terms of implementing and deploying renewables. But I think government should focus more on making sure that businesses and people and communities are able to make that transition into the new world of renewables.
So Paddy, I mean, if you look at some of these countries, and a lot of people talk about India, for instance, you have a young population, you have growth in lifespan, and the rapid spread of benefits of development in the smaller towns and cities, increasing expectations of better lifestyle that's affordable, but that could also act as like an impediment almost to the adoption of renewable energy, because it's more expensive in the short term. It's going to be more expensive in the long term, and civil society needs to really promote the green economy, because the success will depend on people's willingness to adopt the technology, to have more convenience, speed, and security in the long term.
No, I think the way that you even framed that question is an excellent sort of entry point. Unfortunately, because technology moved so fast, well, actually, fortunately, but in the context of this answer, it's unfortunate. It's moved so fast and driven the cost down so quickly. There's a hell of a lot of myth and misunderstanding around what it really is, what is doable in my country, is it really that low? If you take, and there are several good examples of emerging countries. Morocco, excellent example. South Africa. I mean, South Africa went through a hell of a messy political mess, state capture and all that nonsense over a period of 10 years. But during that same period of 10 years, they were able to protect the launch of a renewable energy program that rapidly deployed significant volumes. The state capture sort of stopped it, otherwise they wouldn't be in the mess that they are in. But in between, they were able to put 20,000 megawatts, 10,000 in the system and another 10,000 in construction of new renewable energy capacity at very competitive prices. So that's a developing country that is, so it is not expensive upfront. It is in heavy investment upfront, but there is a huge amount of capital that is available. Capital is not the problem. Technology is not the problem. The problem is inertia, horrific lack of understanding of what is possible, and incumbents trying to keep their share of the market without recognizing that in fact their share of the market is even not going to get damaged for quite some time, because the new capacity is going to serve the growth and expansion. Renewables allows us to reduce the average cost of energy in any country. Given the fact that energy is used for just about anything and everything we do, for life itself, can you imagine the multiplier impact? I keep trying to point out, I mean, this is very obvious, but you need to think. Just one second. 12 cents as an average number. When you get energy at 12 cents, you're not going to poor community. Tough for this audience to imagine, for me to imagine, but 12 cents. I would try to use the energy as minimum as possible because it's expensive. When I can supply energy at 4 cents, I am going to take the energy and use it to creatively produce other things and create more value for myself. So that is the real impact. It's not about the 12 and the 4. It's about how much of multiplier that it will have into the economy. And that is all renewable energy. And the third thing, that 12 cents is a price that oscillates every day depending on the fuel market of the world. God doesn't charge us. So the 4 cents is fixed. So I know with certainty I don't need to worry about my price for the next 35 years. Huge compelling value proposition. It's just not understood.
I want to echo that point because
and pick up on this. I mean, how do we ensure though that the transition itself doesn't turn out to be the path of like insurmountable difficulty?
But I want to understand when you say difficulty, because what I wanted to echo was that, you know, in Mexico we can produce at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
The government produces at 80%, 100%, sorry, no, it's the other way around. We produce at 80% less than the government.
Yeah.
So it's not more expensive, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So not only do you have renewable energy, it's cheaper. It's a higher upfront investment, but you've got capital that wants to do that. Because you know your operating costs are lower later, but you've got other sources that again are dirtier and more expensive. So to me, it's just again, it's a question of making sure, as was just mentioned, that everyone understands what the value proposition is and what the impact is going to be. The impact actually can be something lower. Like I said, you will have some possible disruption at a local community level, but we just need to educate. And to me, the government should be serving that function of making sure that they help in that transition. But from an energy production perspective, and from a global perspective, it's there. The elements to doing it are there.
Yeah, and sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And just to share our experience of the development in the hydrogen, it's a similar story because it's also part of the renewable energy. We have seen like all the stakeholders in the society need to work on that goal, and especially the policymakers, the end users, as well as like investors. I mean, that's all can put all the puzzles together. That's what makes it happen. For example, I think at the policymaker level, we see internationally there's zero emission or carbon neutrality goal. I think that's definitely will help with overcoming some of the difficulties people might foresee. And also at the government level, like in Europe, Middle East, and I believe also in India and Mexico, and in China, I just saw the news in Saudi as well. They also have their carbon emission goal, 2050.
Yeah.
Country have a different timeline, so I think that helps a lot as well. And at the end user level, I think the gentleman greatly demonstrate the benefits of using renewable energy, because what they more care about is whether the cost will come down. Yeah. So as long as we can demonstrate that will help a lot. And other stakeholders, for example, investors, we were talking about this yesterday with a group of investors. So ESG is a huge topic at the moment. And all the investors, they're looking into opportunity in renewable energy or like ESG sector. So from their perspective, as long as they can see, they can get return from the investment, or they can list on stock exchanges, I think that ticks the box as well.
Okay, Sherif, so the IAEA says that electricity demand is set to grow by 40 to 60% in some regions in the next 10 years. And researchers predict the mounting prosperity in the developed and developing world will continue to drive this demand for key resources. But at the same time, you have these constraints in energy, water, and other natural resources, bringing about kind of difficult to manage instabilities. So as we've been talking, traditional modes of power is still going to be needed if we are short of a green of the green electricity. There's a stopgap measure, as Paddy was saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, again, this is not a competing between renewable, traditional, and everything. I think there is a bit of an overestimating of the speed that you can transition.
Yep.
I think, with all due respect, the green hydrogen and all this is going to take much, much longer time than what people estimated. I think the molecule price is still extremely expensive. There is a lot of finance that needs to happen in a lot of countries that we don't look at it. If you look at Africa as an example, if you look at the water problem, I think people totally underestimate the water. And that's what we keep saying, how even taking the slogan of the conference here, our humanity, and how can you provide sustainable energy and provide water. And one of the examples, for example, we said before, even look at the oil industry. The oil industry produces 5 times water than oil. A lot of people don't know that, but we produce 500 million barrels of water per day, and we produce 100 million barrels. Most of this water is wasted. If you want to look at the humanity and what we can do, we can actually take that water and give it to humanity for other projects. So it's not only electricity. They need electricity. We need to clean the water. We need to give it back to the community. We need renewable to be able to make the green hydrogen, which is, again, you need source, you need land. So there is a lot of that cost, for example, that you talk about in the Middle East and Morocco. All this is because the land is for free, right? If you look at that cost in the US, it doesn't cost you, by the way, 2-3 cents. It costs you much more than that. If you want to change your house in Texas or whatever, it was going to cost you $90,000 in investment first, or the solar company is going to subsidize you for 20 years. So it is not really one solution for all the countries. You have to look at every solution and every country and where are the means of that financing for it. But again, I just want to reiterate, we are not competing. All the technology are needed and all the sources are needed for the next 30 years at least.
So I want to ask you about climate change, but Paddy, how far away are we from a time where the old technologies don't make sense anymore? I think of mobile, for instance. There are countries that didn't have landline, kind of telecommunications, and just completely bypassed and went straight to mobile. So cost has declined so much that the biggest obstacle to expansion is not there. So what about countries? If you have a tenth of humanity that still doesn't have electricity, how far are we from countries being like, forget about it, I'm just going straight to renewables?
Look, I think, countries are starting to go down that road. So the good news about renewable energy, again, much used terminology, energy has been democratized. That energy is everywhere. It's not just in a few pockets. And and the technology is very modular. We capture it at the place where the energy is being provided. So we are able to put a rooftop panel and a battery and provide a very good life for the occupant of that house. So that is starting to be deployed at scale. You are seeing microgrids, mini grids, so localized solutions. You're absolutely right. I think there is a substantial part of the underserved world today who will completely bypass wires and poles, and they will go straight into localized solutions. And even with hydrogen in due course, because hydrogen is also the same story, by the way. Electrolyzers don't come in monstrous modules. They are smaller modules. So it'll all get localized over time. So over the next 30 years, and
it'll create a lot more equity.
Absolutely. Just let's think about the fact. Let's look at history. Let's look at every transition. There have been many other transitions. Every transition took 20 to 30 years. Very tumultuous time. There were a bunch of naysayers who said it's never going to happen. There were losers, and that lot lost. And the winners, even the incumbents who embraced it and jumped into it, and like many people are starting to do, many of the oil and gas companies are starting to do, who participated in the transition, are the subsequent winners. So the transition, we are on that trajectory. It's not a discussion around, is it going to happen, is it not going to happen? It's going to happen, it's finished, end of story, bus left the station. Only question now, how quick? Okay, we are in the early stage. We are in the first 3 to 4 years. So from my timing, even in this sort of accelerated world where everything happens fast, probably we got another 16 to 18
So as
years.
Sherif says, I mean, we're still we're not going back,
No.
but we can't, we're not forward yet. We're not all where we want to be yet.
No, I mean, you have two issues. One is that you've got an infrastructure that's been put in place for, 100 years?
Right.
So to replace that infrastructure, you can't do that overnight, right? That's one thing. Second is that global growth means electricity consumption. You can see that curve.
Right.
So as the world continues to, improve or grow economically, you're going to increase consumption.
Right.
So, and at the same time, you're retiring existing, assets that are, past their operating life. So, there's so much growth in energy consumption because people like their 60-inch TVs, they like their cell phones, they like their electric cars, they like their air conditioning at 70, 68 degrees. With all that, there's huge energy growth, right? So
It's just going to take time. It's just going to take time.
Exactly.
I think
It takes time.
Amin Nasser put it very nicely when he said in Germany today, use coal at $60 to $80, so actually switching to coal as energy transition, not switching to renewable, right? So it is time. It is absolutely, fully agree, it's just time.
I want to ask you about climate change. How much should states be proactively worried about climate change impact? So, Sherif brought up water, but drought conditions, particularly in a lot of areas, if you want to rely on water, hydro power, how can that be a feature in terms of achieving clean energy goals if we get this permanent loss of a significant source of carbon-free electricity that's not replaced by others? Climate does kind of limit a little bit, if we're using the planet to help provide energy, isn't it a kind of cyclical problem?
By the way, I'm very sorry to tell you that I'm very happy that we're going to have a hell of a lot more climate catastrophe and calamity because that will focus our mind. Think of all the unintended consequences that we are waking up to.
I'm not saying that that's not an impediment, that's not an imperative, but isn't it also an impediment?
But let me tell you immediately, even with the existing energy infrastructure that we have, the fossil fuel infrastructure, what is the consequence of climate change? The river water levels go down. All of a sudden, the water intake and discharge that is required for the cooling of the fossil fuel for power plants are all in the wrong place. Well, they're not in the wrong place, they were in the right place, but climate change has dropped the water level down. It's going to take you 18 months to 2 years of big investment in order to reposition those. Nuclear power plants are going to run into trouble. Hydroelectric plants are already in trouble. They get flooded in the wrong time, they dry up in the wrong time. So even the existing energy infrastructure architecture is going to get hammered, quite apart from the fact that so we are going to have to, and when we do that, we're going to become much more alert and acute to the fact that we shouldn't be relying on those things. We should be relying on technology, on the new technologies that are coming available, whether it is and even this battery, what about when it's not sun is shining? There is solutions already. In Dubai, we are deploying 1,000 megawatt, 900 megawatt plant to supply 24 hours a day at a cheaper price, 7.2 cents per kilowatt hour, than that country can do with fossil fuel based for 24 hours. So the solutions are there. It's all about the rate at which we can do it. How quickly can we bring the capacity online?
Do you want to weigh in on
But what I wanted to say is that you can't rely on one sort of alternative energy or renewable energy source as your solution. It's got to be a mix, and it's got to be a mix not only of renewable, but also fossil fuels. It's simply because of the demand is so high. Now you bring up a great point, which is climate change is upon us. We have been slow in acting to reduce the impact of humans on the global climate, but it's happened, right? So,
and now we're asking even more of the planet because we're looking for them to provide, we're looking for the planet to provide our energy.
wherever we can, right? So I mean, like I said, you can't just rely on
Right.
water for hydro,
Right.
because even he's got a great point on nuclear or coal or any other sort
Right.
of thermal requires water as well. So
Right.
if your water level in that region is either drying up or lower, then you've got a problem, no matter what the
Well,
source is.
yeah, it's obviously hot, so you'll have solar. Sherif,
Exactly.
if corporations are making the switch to carbon neutral energy, they're putting, you kind of reflected on this, they're putting indirect pressure on land already scarce from competing uses, urbanization, industrial development, because more renewable plants are going to be needed to satisfy demand. So this in turn is going to put added stress on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of stress on the system already, as mentioned by all the panelists, right? So that's why you have to see the most economical, best way to do it in a proper manner. Not, again, not one solution fits every country, fits everywhere. In places like here, we have no problem with land.
Okay.
So we can put anything we want on any land, and it's free of charge. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point, and I think every country is different. Even within country, every province, every region is different. I think the beauty of having renewable energy and the traditional energy sources is that we can pick and choose to see which one is more suitable based on the local, the local conditions.
Yeah.
And secondly, back to the climate change, I think also another beauty of a renewable energy, and of course the traditional energy source is that, yes. So we can use what's available in the climate, right? If it's solar, then we use solar.
Right,
If wind.
right. Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time, but as we close, I want to just very quickly, which of these, we're talking a lot about all different types of renewables, which is the one that shows the most promise to you?
I would go for renewable hydrogen.
Right, Paddy.
Look, renewable energy renewable energy is going to be the solution. All the different technologies will apply, but green hydrogen will be a significant component of that final energy solution.
Jaime.
For my country, solar.
Solar.
Solar. Okay, well, we could talk another hour about this, but I'd like to thank everybody for
Thank you.
coming, and thank you to my panel.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you very
me.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.